Hello, and welcome to the joint ICRP and NPO Fukushima Dialogue webinar. This webinar marks the 15th anniversary of the Fukushima nuclear accident and will focus on testimonies on the past, present, and future. The point of this webinar is to share the current situation in Fukushima 15 years after the accident, as well as expectations and challenges for the future through mainly testimonies from residents. This event is being offered in both Japanese and English. To select your preferred language, just go to the bottom toolbar in Zoom titled Interpretation. For questions, please use the Q&A function on the bottom toolbar. Speakers will try to address as many questions as possible before the end of the webinar. And questions can be asked in either Japanese or English. Thanks to everyone for joining today. My name is Chris Clement. I'm Scientific Secretary and CEO of the International Commission on Radiological Protection. And I'll give you a brief introduction to some of the first actions by ICRP after the accident before I pass on to the next speaker. So one moment, please. So my name, as I mentioned, my name is Chris Clement, and I'm just going to give you a bit of information about ICRP's first actions following the accident. As you can imagine, ICRP was very interested in what was happening in Fukushima as the accident began and progressed. We followed activities very closely. We sent information out to everyone who was interested on some recent advice that ICRP had prepared on nuclear accidents only 1 year before the accident, fortuitously. And one of the key activities was immediately after the accident, helping to facilitate informal communication between experts around the world who were scrambling to find out what was happening, to get information from Japan and to provide advice from experts informally from all over the world through ICRP contacts. As time progressed, we also provided advice to governments and communities to help recovery. It's one of the main drivers of our actions. And a second driver of our actions was to gather information to improve ICRP recommendations for the future in case future major nuclear accidents. One of the largest, perhaps the largest action, definitely the largest action ICRP took over the years was to initiate the Fukushima dialogues. This was led by Jacques Lechard, who you hear from a little bit later in this webinar, leaning on his experience in Belarus in particular, following the accident in Chernobyl. Otsuda Niwa, who played a key role in gathering participants for the dialogue seminars, at least, or dialogue initiatives, at least at the beginning, and myself. The first dialogue meeting was held at the Fukushima Prefectural Council Hall in November 2011. And it was an experiment. We didn't really know if it would work, if people wanted this, but we were trying to find a way to both learn more about what was going on and help as much as we could in the situation. This, I would say, was a success, this first dialogue, which included a declaration of 7 points. I'll only mention one. And the group agreed that there was a need and willingness to continue with the dialogue to identify the ways to improve the situation. Now I'll go through very quickly some of the first dialogues, or all of the first dialogues that ICRP organized, not in depth because we don't really have the time, and you'll hear more about this later anyway from other speakers. But you can see the next dialogue was on ways to improve the radiological situation and improve living conditions. This is, of course, the overall objective of the work in any case. I'll go very quickly, just to give you a sense of the kinds of topics that were covered during these dialogue meetings. And actually, let me say that to give you a sense of what a dialogue meeting is like, generally it's an audience who are watching and listening to a relatively small number of, let's say, core participants who are giving testimonies about various topics, all related to recovery in Fukushima, obviously. And a key part of this is testimonies from mainly local people, but not only. There are also some people from, for instance, Belarus or Norway, with their experience after Chernobyl, talking about aspects of recovery. So the topics that we looked at were challenge of contaminated foodstuff. This was a key topic in the beginning. Education of children, returning or not for people who had evacuated, or staying or not for people who had not. These are key questions that people wanted to discuss. And of course, challenges of evacuation, living in exile. I should say that ICRP went only where we were invited to have a dialogue seminar, and we selected the topics based on what local people wanted to talk about. So although ICRP managed these webinars, they were really driven by community interest and need. The next few dialogues spoke about self-help actions taken by local people in cooperation with experts, about challenges in Minami Soma, a particular community, and looking at fragmentation of the community. So you can see now we're talking about, I guess, topics that might not be considered specifically about radiological protection, like traditional radiological protection, but the bigger questions of recovery after the accident. Raising children and how to behave in a contaminated environment, the value of tradition and culture in Fukushima. And towards the end of the first phase, the role of measurements, and our last dialogue meeting of the first set, I would say, looking back at experience that we gained together. At this point, 3 years later, we decided it was time to share this information with the broader community and organize an international workshop in the Fukushima Dialogue Initiative, rehabilitation of living conditions after the nuclear accident. You can find information about all of these webinars, dialogue meetings, I should say, on the ICRP website and also on the NPO Fukushima website. There was then a period where it was thought best to transfer responsibility for the dialogues to the local people. I mean, it's the local community who was driving this already, and it was time for the local people to start taking over. So over a period of a couple of years, there was a transition where we had a number of dialogue meetings, and you can see the topics here. Many of them related to specific communities, but some are more broad, during which ICRP managed the dialogues and slowly gave over organization responsibilities to the local community. In the end, we led 12 Fukushima dialogue meetings from November 2011 to September 25. The 13th to the 20th dialogue meetings were jointly organized with local community, and the NPO Fukushima Dialogue, NPO is a nonprofit organization, was established in 2019 and took over full responsibility since the 20th Fukushima Dialogue. And there's a QR code there if you want to click on it to get information from the ICRP website anyway. You can also just go to the ICRP website and you'll find it without too much difficulty. At the beginning, I said one of the objectives for ICRP was to prepare recommendations for the possible future nuclear accidents, and we did so. You can see here publication 146 on the protection of people and the environment in the event of a large nuclear accident. This was released in 2020. And we also had a conference that we hope to have in Fukushima, but unfortunately we scheduled it in 2021, so we had to revert to an online meeting. But nonetheless, if you go to the ICRP website, you can read the proceedings of this international conference on recovery after nuclear accidents, radiological protection lessons from Fukushima and beyond. And with that, I hope that gives you some introduction about how this effort began, and I'd be pleased to pass this over to Ryoko Ando to continue. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now it is my turn. So I would like to start my presentation. So this is my presentation. I would like to talk about the present of Fukushima, the current status of Fukushima. We are taking questions. When you ask questions to Japanese speakers, please make sure who should answer to your question so that it will be easier for us to facilitate the Q&A session. So first, let me tell you where Fukushima is. This is Japan, and it is located. Sorry. I can't really change the slide. Actually, I am operating quite well on my side, but somehow it doesn't really show. Here we go. So I would like to continue. So this is Fukushima. And the red part is Fukushima. It is located north of Tokyo. And you can see the Fukushima prefecture's map on the right. The TEPCO Fukushima Daiichi is facing Pacific Ocean, and you can see 20-kilometer, 30-kilometer radius area. And you can see the star mark, which indicate where I live. Right after the accident in Fukushima, there was a lot of chaos. These pictures were taken in December 2011 when I organized a workshop. These pictures were taken. Back then, you could see people's faces look so worried, confused. They didn't know anything about radiation and didn't know what to do. Also, there was a very strong distrust towards the government and authorities and TEPCO because they were not able to prevent the accident, and also the institutions and experts also had a lot of confusion amongst them. So loss of confidence and uncertainty were there, and also there was a lot of anxiety towards the scientific knowledge. As Chris said, we started ICRP dialogue back then, and also I was representative of ASOS of Fukushima. As a capacity of representative of that group, I joined the dialogue. So this is the administrative steps of the recovery process. 2011, Fukushima accident took place and evacuation orders were issued. And also reorganization of the evacuation areas took place in 2012. And between 2013 and 2020, we saw a gradual lifting of evacuation orders. Still there are certain areas under evacuation orders. In 2022, there was a lifting of some designations of certain areas, such as specified reconstruction bases. So evacuation orders are issued first, and there were some different evacuation zones, and which was reorganized and reorganized again. So it has always been very confusing for local residents. This is the attenuation of air dose rate in the Fukushima prefecture. On the left-hand side, you can see the status as of November 2011 and December 2024 on the right. All in all, you could see that the radiation level has gone down quite significantly. But if you look at the northwest area, which was a very hot spot back in 2011, is still in yellow. So as for the areas in yellow, we can say that a dose level is relatively high. And this is the conceptual map of the evacuation areas and how evacuation areas designation changed. In 2011, the situation was as shown on the left-hand side. We had the restricted areas and deliberate evacuation areas. In 2012, there was some reorganization of evacuation areas. And then we saw the commencement of lifting of evacuation orders. And these are the three requirements for lifting evacuation orders by the government. So as you can see that when it is certain that annual cumulative dose estimated by the dose rate will be less than or equal to 20 millisieverts, that's the first requirement. And you can see there were requirements related to lifelines and consultation with local residents, and these are all created after the accident. Based on the requirements, 2014, the government started lifting evacuation orders. The shaded areas in green are the areas that were evacuation orders lifted. So lifting of evacuation orders started from the green areas. And then on the right-hand side, you could see the current status. And the areas shaded in black still remain as very difficult to return zones, which we don't know when evacuation order be lifted. But other than that, evacuation orders are gradually being lifted. This is the changes in the population of evacuation areas. The dotted bars represent the population before the accident. The pale green portions show the registered residents, and the dark green means actual resident population. As you can see, registered residents compared against actual resident is very small. Compared to the situation back in 2011, actual resident population is very, very small. It's been 15 years since the nuclear power plant accident. So I think people's situation has settled. However, the complexity of the situation hasn't changed, or we can even say it has become worse. At the very beginning, people were worried about radiation. So in the early phase, radiation risk is the primary concern. But the radiation levels gradually decreased, and measures are taken, and the countermeasures were implemented. Having said that, radiation is quite persistent. The confusion or chaos is not so bad compared to right after the accident, but still people are concerned, and there's a vague concerns lingering. Another thing is that there's a drastic movement of population. Therefore, it is difficult to pass down lived experiences and government policies. There are numerous policies implemented which continue to affect people's lives. Each new change brings different situations and growing divisions and complexity. Let me talk about Fukushima dialogue. We were established in 2019 as a nonprofit organization to succeed activities initiated by ICRP. We organize a dialogue twice a year. We continue to recruit members. So if you're interested, please utilize this QR code on this page to join us. About the Fukushima Dialogue current activities. So our activities are triggered by ICRP, and we are continuing what was started by ICRP. And I think this is a quite unique activities that we are undertaking. This was allow those affected by the accident to communicate with those outside the area as well. And this shows the pictures taken at the different dialogues. Every dialogue we have a different title, and we gather people relevant to the title. December 2025 was the latest one, which was held in Okuma Town. So I think that's all from me. My presentation is followed by Jacques Lochal. So I would like to ask Jacques to continue.
Thank you, Ryoko, for your kind introduction. Hello to all of you. I am Jacques Lochal, currently emeritus member of ICRP. The first slide will be presented by Ryoko. Ryoko, can you put the first slide? The next one. You hear me? Yeah, okay. My presentation is to introduce you very briefly our ICRP followed a very interesting experience that has been also very influential, like the dialogue meeting that was presented by Chris Clement before, for preparing the ICRP publication 146, which on the promotion of the protection of people and the environment in case of nuclear accident. In fact, following the third ICRP dialogue in July 2012, Ryoko Ando invited a small group of ICRP members to the village of Suetsegi, which is located about 28 kilometers from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, where she was involved in a study group. Her role in this group was initially to help residents to interpret the results of measurements performed by a local leader, Shinya Endo, a resident, to assess the radiological situation in the village. Later on, and until 2019, she cooperated with the community. The meeting organized in July 2012 was held in the community hall and brought together about 50 residents. The ICRP presented its experience gained in Belarus in the late 90s, following the Chernobyl disaster. After listening to the residents, ICRP offered advice, and in the following years, the residents implemented, in cooperation with local leaders, a similar approach than the one that was implemented in Belarus long time before, and which allow the residents of Suetsugi to gradually regain control of the situation. The ICRP visited the area regularly to monitor the progress made. The approach developed in Suetsegi was very instructive for ICRP, which in recognition presented a plaque to the group of local leaders who had been on the front line for 8 years. Can you put the next slide, Ryoko? The approach that was developed relies on 3 pillars. First, a series of dialogue meetings between residents and experts to exchange questions, concerns, and expectations. And there was about 200, can you imagine, 200 dialogue meetings during all the years of the process. The second pillar is the measurement of ambient radioactivity, implemented jointly by residents and by experts, to identify where and when residents receive external and internal exposure, and then to measure these exposures. The third pillar is the implementation of local projects by residents in cooperation with experts to both protect people, but also to improve their living conditions in order to regain control of the situation. These three pillars form what is now known as the co-expertise process, which ICRP recommends in publication 146. The next slide, please, Ryoko. Okay, the next slide presents the local leaders who played a key role in the success of this experience. And I'd like to take the opportunity of this meeting to thank them once again warmly. They made a tremendous work. Hiroshi Takagi, the mayor of Suetsegi, Maiko Moma, a councillor hired by the local residents to help them, Shinya Endo, the leader of Suetsegi, our hometown, who made the first measurements, took the decisions to make measurements. Then, of course, Ryoko Ando from Ethos in Fukushima at that time, and Makoto Miyazaki, a radiologist from Fukushima Medical University, who played a key role for advising the residents and explaining the situation to them. Finally, the next slide presents the reference of the 30 minutes video prepared by Yu Miyai, Ryoko Ando, and Tatsuko Arai, summarizing what happened within the community. You can find this video on YouTube. It's very, very instructive. Finally, I invite you now to watch a short 8 minutes video featuring Mrs. Tetsuko Endo. She was scheduled to speak at this webinar, but sadly passed away suddenly 2 weeks ago. Fortunately, as she was featured in the video on Suetsugi, we asked Yu Miyai, the videographer, to prepare this short version that we are presenting as a tribute to Tetsuko. Thank you for your attention.
津波がこう川をね上がってくるところと、そして引き波っていうんですかね、倒したものをねみんな海に持っていくあれをね、高台にいたもんですから見たんですね。それで現実に目の前に見ながら現実とは思えない感覚で見てましたね。 本当に知らないことばかりでしたから、いくら新聞やテレビで解説されたり読んだりしても理解そのものがねしがたい、その分からないながらの怖さっていうのが一番不安感を生活していく上で一番ありましたね。宇都宮ではニュースや何かでもやらないですし、こちらでしたら少しはねニュースの量も多いですし、ただ時の東電さんの発表は、はい、大変偽りが多かった信用できない、今から思えばね信用できない発表が、多々あったんですけど、でも情報のないっていうのがすごく人間って不安になるんだなっていうのも思いましたね。
これがあれで最初
しいたけの原木1本です。0.528。しいたけの原木。はい。
0.5?537。自分の住んでるところで自分たちが測って自分の値だったりしますよね。そうするとやっぱり話として聞いてるのとこう自分がやってみてというその違いかと思いますけどね。
誰もこれだから俺らは今思うのは忘れられちゃったこの地域かなと思ってるよ。行政からも何にも。だから俺はロシアルさんに助けてもらったんじゃねえかなっていう気はするよ。
赤と緑の線が入ってて、で毎日これをやるわけじゃなかったり、これをもし毎日やったとしても、ずっとこの高さでずっと。
全部そういういろんな生活している方たちが120名測って第1回目の時ね、それでほとんど皆さん大丈夫だったっていうことで、主人はもうそれを聞いて大安心しても最初はやっぱりそうやって地区上げて、120名の方が受けたっていうのはすごく大きな力ですよね。
というのは
は密度が1に近ければ近いほど正確、普通を超えてくるようなものに関しては
そう生活ってこういうことなんだなって改めてね季節になったら自然のね季節のものを自然にとっていただけるってすごい豊かなことだなって今気づかされてというかね思いますね。
常にその顔見知りになって初めて本熱がそれを口に出せんでねえかなって気したよ。だからロシアの先生なんかは本心本音言うからね。もちろんあの人らは今まで王だからあの人らも構わねえし。
なんか研究の対象とかそういうあれじゃなくて本当にとにかく真心から始めてくださってしかもそれを続けてくださってでその関係からロシアさんが来てくださるということで、この方は何なんだろうって不思議でありありがたくもありその場にいて膝を突き合わせて笑顔でいるとやっぱり支援しようとしてくださってるってそういうものって人間同士って伝わってくるんでやっぱりここまで足を運んで来てくださるという、そのことはすごくなんか勇気づけられたというかやっぱり見守ってくださる人がいるっていうのは大きなことだと思いますね。
はい、ありがとうございました。それではですね、
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to introduce today's speakers. You can see the map here and the numbers along with the human-like icon. So these are the locations from where today's speakers come from. So first speaker, number one is Akihiko Hirono in Yamakia, Kawamata, the former planned evacuation area he's from, and this evacuation order lifted in March 2017. And Yoshiki Aoki is from Tamioka, and it was a former restricted residence area. This was lifted in April 2017. Number three is Harue Sanpei from Tsushima, Namie, and the specified reconstruction and revitalization basis lifted in March 2023, but only partially lifted. And Nori Kimura is from Okuma. The evacuation order partially lifted. His house is actually located inside the interim storage facility site, so he can't really go back. And the number five is Shotaro Abe in Okuma. Okuma is evacuation order has been lifted. And this is the today's speakers with some details. Actually, you could download the detailed information of each speaker on the website. So maybe you can go to the link later on and read the details. As you can see, today's speakers are from different locations. Therefore, you will hear different stories. And some of you may be surprised to hear that there are so many different stories, even though they are all from Fukushima. And I think it will be a very beneficial experience for you to hear. So first, I would like to ask Mr. Akihiko Hirono to speak. Please wait for a moment. Give us a moment.
蒲田町山木屋地区 So I am Akihiko Hirono. I'm a flower grower in Yamakiya, Kamata town. So I will speak about the activities at Yamakiya today. So it appears the slides are not moving forward. So it's working now. So we will continue. So this is the topics I'll be covering today. So we grow Lithianthus for living. Then I will talk about the Yamakiya, where it is located, about the evacuation that happened, and those are current status of Lithianthus cultivation, and the rice paddies right after the evacuation order was lifted, start an expansion of rice cultivation, passing on traditional performing arts, and migration and settlement promotion. So I'll be speaking about these topics. And I grow Lithianthus, this kind of flower, for living. So we do have different types of these flowers. So this is one of them, which is one of the most popular ones that sells well. And the cultivation happens about, we begin seeding in winter, we grow seedlings, and then we plant the seedlings in the field, and the flowers bloom at around July to October. And that is how we grow them. And next, this is the location of Yamakiya, and as was already mentioned, it was part of the evacuation zone on the northwestern part of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. And we are 33 kilometers to 40 kilometers away from the power plant. And this is how the evacuation occurred in Yamakiya. So in 2011, on April the 11th, the governments included Yamakiya within the planned evacuation zone. And on April the 22nd, we were instructed to evacuate. And meanwhile, we were still continuing to grow the flowers. And after the radiation accident, we had no information. And I wasn't sure whether we could stay here. I was worried. And then in 2013, there was an evacuation order. And while we were evacuating, we started growing the flowers again on a trial basis. And in 2014, in May, the contamination was started on the farmland. And the same year, we started commercial cultivation of the Lithianthus flowers. And in 2017, on March the 31st, the evacuation order was lifted. And the current status of Lithianthus cultivation, compared with the past, the amount we ship has decreased. At the moment, our goal is to increase the quantities to pre-disaster levels. And we put more labor for each flower, so we have better quality of the flowers. But we want to maintain that quality while increasing the quantity. And for that, we need workforce. But unfortunately, we are in an evacuated area. We have less population. We were able to, before we could ask the neighbors to work on our farm, but we cannot do that anymore with the decreased number of population. And after the disaster, we have increase in soil bacteria and some of the flowers becomes wilted because of that, and we will need to take measures against this. And immediately after the evacuation order was lifted, so this was used as a storage site, temporary storage site for decontamination waste. So on the rice fields along the road was used as a temporary storage site for decontamination waste. And this shows when after we converted the storage site into a rice paddy, and that is how it looked like. So you can see the scenery has changed completely. So we have been able to restore the original scenery in the area, which I think was a good thing. And we started trial cultivation of rice, and then we were able to restart cultivation. But the number of farmers in the neighborhood has decreased. So they commission us, they entrust us with rice growing to us. And immediately after restarting rice cultivation, we had about 40,000 square meters. But then last year it was increased to 140,000 square meters. And next is the passing down of traditional performing arts. And this is what is known as Yamakiya Sanbiki Shishi, the three lion dance, which I partake in. And I used to partake in this since I was child, and now I instruct the people so that we can continue preserve the local festivals. And last year we had children participate, and we were able to teach them how to dance in the festival. And in the past, the eldest son played a major role, so they were given instructions in dancing in preference to other siblings. But at the moment, the situation had changed. And so any children who wants to participate can learn and be taught how to dance and partake in the festivals. So for this lion dance, this has been continued for 400 years, according to legend. So we want to be able to preserve this as long as possible. And so I'm here from Kawamata, and actually there is the Migrations and Settlement Promotion Committee, and I am the chair of this committee. And we are trying to attract people willing to migrate to Kawamata, and we have discussions as we carry out our activities. And we have meetings within our town. And the local residents work as committee members. They're selected as committee members. And we have discussions about how we should carry out PR activities for our town and what kind of measures are needed to attract people to migrate to our town. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
My name is Kimura from Okuma Town. I would like to introduce myself first. I was born in Kumagawa, coastal village of Kumagawa in Okuma Town, and there were 6 of us as a family before the disaster. So 6 of us and also a dog. We were living in there, and after tsunami, our area was submerged. As you could see, the blue arrow shows where our house was. I was working in Tomioka, the pork farm. After this earthquake, it was horrible, but I went back home, which was at 5 p.m. I arrived at home, but my house was gone. But I'm quite optimistic person, so I was actually quite impressed by the power of a tsunami, and I had no idea what had happened to my family. I didn't really think my family was harmed. However, I saw my mother and my first daughter afterwards, and I was told that my father, my wife, and also 7-year-old second daughter, Yuna, were missing. So I went back home where our house was, and my dog came up to me, and his name was Bell, and he had his leash on him, meaning that he was actually having a walk with my wife. But the dog was covered by mud, and I knew that he was actually swept away by tsunami, but survived, and then learned that my wife and other members were swept away by tsunami. But after that, evacuation order was issued, so I had to evacuate. But it took 5 years and 9 months before I could find the remains of my second daughter. Because of the evacuation order, it took so long. Had it not been for the evacuation order, I feel I could have found her much earlier, and maybe she was still alive. So that was what I experienced. That's my nuclear accident and earthquake, and I still spend 10 days a year to look for more remains of my daughter. So Okuma town is here along the coast, and this is where my house was. So this is the enlarged map. 12th of March 2011, the evacuation orders issued for entire town, so everyone had to leave. And 2019, 8 years after that, in April, the western part in white, the evacuation order was lifted, and the town hall and some houses were built. And in 2022, on the 30th of June, Ono Station and around the area of the station were redeveloped, and the environment was provided to accommodate 60% of the original population. And currently 1,500 people are living in Okuma town, but 500 of them are actually commuting from outside Okuma town. So there are only about 1,000 people living in Okuma. And 700 actually migrated after the accident. Therefore, actually, the original town citizen only 300. It's been 15 years since the disaster. Other people who evacuated their lives away from Okuma town, it's very difficult for them to return. Therefore, Okuma town has to recruit the people from other municipalities. And the areas in red are still under evacuation order. People cannot live there. And also the areas surrounding Fukushima Daiichi was designated as an interim storage site, meaning that after decontamination, there is a contaminated soil, and all that contaminated soil will be stored in this interim storage area. So the landowners there actually sold the land to the authority. The land inherited over generations was sold, and which included the area where my house located. And I was not engaged in any negotiation with the authority because I had no intention of selling my house. And in 2019, the evacuation order was lifted, and town hall was built, and the reconstruction housing was built, and the Umenomori Learning Center was built, and also the Joban Line Okuma station surrounding area was redeveloped to house Kuma-san Terrace and Industry Exchange Center Kureba Okuma. So this looks like Okuma town is well on its way for recovery. But if you go to shopping district in front of Ono Station, there were many old buildings ransacked by wild animals. And after evacuation order was lifted, all the buildings are gone. You could see the electric post and also some traffic signs. Buildings are old and it's contaminated, so I can understand they need to be removed. However, that was a result of the nuclear disaster, not because of the earthquake. And in Okuma town, the thing is that the buildings that could have been preserved are also being demolished. For example, this Okuma town library was demolished in 2023. There was enough seismic resistance, so we thought this building will be preserved. However, it was demolished because after evacuation order was lifted, within the 2 years from that, if you apply, the demolition would be funded by the government. And then if you want to build a new facilities, the government is willing to fund that as well. However, if you want to repair the existing building, all the costs need to be borne by the municipalities. Therefore, decision was made to demolish and build everything anew. However, you could understand that there's a lot of memories with these old buildings. I had a lot of memories with my children there. And you can ask yourself whether you want to return to your hometown. Well, all these memories are gone. That's very questionable. Within the site of internal storage, my house was located. And if you go 4 kilometers north, there is a new Fukushima Daiichi, and between my house, and Fukushima Daiichi, there's a new interim storage site, and there's a legal requirement that before 2045, all the contaminated soil need to be removed and transported to the final disposal site. But there's no prospect of deciding the site for the final disposal site. Who want to accept the contaminated soil as a final disposal site? No one. And if you force that to other municipalities, there was a division within the citizens, within the family members. I don't want that to happen to other municipalities. So I'm kind of feel that perhaps interim storage site need to be the final disposal site as well. I think that would probably the most rational decision. However, landowners who sold the land for the interim storage facility purpose, they sold the land, leased the land under the condition that all the contaminated soil would be transported to final disposal site before 2045. So the initiative of Okuma Miraijuku is that to preserve the traces of tsunami and the areas where you could actually feel what had happened to Fukushima Daiichi. So we organize the tours there, and eco museum concept is there as well. So rather than building a museum building, the concept is to have the entire area as eco museum, and I think this is a good idea because you could see actual traces of tsunami, and this would encourage you to think about DRR, and you could see the impact of a nuclear accident. And this would be a learning opportunity for visitor to what a nuclear disaster could do to the society. With regard to the search of the remains of my second daughter, well, young students often help me. I'm searching for her remains, and I believe this experience also teach something to the students who participate. And also, I'm very happy to have those young students to help redevelop the area. So I hope that this area will help students to become very competent, to be self-sufficient. So that's I'm currently working on. Also, I would like to continue to measure the radiation level of my original house as well. I would like to continue the monitoring. Thank you very much. Thank you.
次は、富岡町の311を語る会。
Next, we have Yasuko Aoki from the Storyteller Associations from Tomioka Town.
青木よしこです。
This is Yoshiko Aoki.
はい。私は今皆さんが集まっていらっしゃるこの富岡町
So
に暮
I
らしてい
am
ます。
living in Tomioka, where this meeting is being held, and I am part of the non-profit organization, a storytelling association. And my title is talking about nuclear disaster-affected areas in its 15th year. And yesterday was the 15th year anniversary. And I'd like to explain about what we are doing in Tomioka, about what we are telling people about. So why do we talk to other people? So as mentioned by Kimura-san just now, and we tell stories, we communicate, which is very important. And whether or not they have experienced it or not, or whether they had lived in this region or not, it's not only about that. For people who have heard about it, they can continue to tell the story to the next generation. And that is the history, how the history is formed through our human intellect. And by talking, and I think maybe one of you in the audience, may imagine that you might have experienced the same thing. I think that is very important that you think that what happened if it was me that experienced it. So in Futaba, in Fukushima, we had a multiple disasters, a complex disaster. And this was very unique because it was not just about natural disaster, but it was coupled with the nuclear disaster. And therefore, 15 years on, we have things that have not been able to be restored. And nuclear disaster has not yet been finished. We have not been able to solve this problem. The power plants that exploded, there is still 880 kilograms of debris, and there are treated water that has been flowing into the water for the next maybe 30 years. And the interim storage site, they promised that they will be taken out in 2045, but we are still uncertain. So there are problems that have not yet been solved. And the residents who live there, their livelihood has not returned back to where it was. So this disaster is not over. And therefore, in some sense, this is an issue for everybody living on this earth. And moreover, this is a very hard to understand disaster because radiation, you cannot see, you cannot smell, you don't know whether it is dangerous or safe. There is nothing certain about it. So we do have data regarding safety. So for example, in Fukushima Prefecture, the foodstuffs, you can measure the radioactivity, whether it is less than 45 becquerel. But we can say, because of the data, we are safe, but we cannot feel safe because that is subject to people's emotions. It does not necessarily make people feel safe. So after the nuclear disaster, I felt that safety and feeling secure is a different things. And then how can we have a sense of security? And that is something we want to think about together. And that is one of our issues. And for that, I am telling my stories. So in Tomioka town, so this photograph, you can see a barricade, and this you see a cherry blossom. I think this is very symbolic. So in Tomioka, we have this cherry blossom. We are very famous for the cherry blossoms. We are proud of our trees. It's about 90% of residents, and if you ask them, they would say, cherry blossoms is a pride of our town. And maybe you ask, you only have nothing more than cherry blossoms, but we are proud of these trees. And there was a barricade after the disaster. And this continued for 11 years. And in 2022, about 40% of the town was still covered by barricades because it was difficult to return zone. In Tomioka in 2011, in March, 22nd, all residents, all 16,000 people had to evacuate because there was an emergency evacuation order. We could not continue to live. And in 2017, on March the 11th, finally, a part of the town, the evacuation order was lifted. And after that, in 2022, the rest of the areas, the barricade was removed. And this photograph is of the barricade where we are looking at the cherry blossoms on the other side of the barricade. And they are inside the barricade. They are houses that people did not live for the last 11 years. And people had to make a decision whether to return or not, whether to demolish their houses or not. And all these decisions was left up to the residents. And when we had to evacuate, it was instructed to do so. But when we were going to return, we had to make our own decisions. And that was a difficult choice. Sometimes the houses remained intact even after the tsunami or earthquake, but people had difficulty making decisions, and the people's feelings, the residents also became divided because they had to make these difficult choices. And the barricades will be removed, but there will be invisible barricades that are being lifted, but amongst the residents, and it breaks down communities. And we have to do something about it if we want to restore our community. And I have students who come to visit us, especially senior high school students and university students. And I invite them to think together. We don't have a single answer. And on the left-hand side photograph, this is the students from Tomioka High School. And students, they disappeared after the disaster, but the building is still there. But there are no students learning in the building. And this building, as mentioned by Kimura-san just now, how can we use this effectively is a question as part of our future city planning. And in Tomioka City, at the moment, here we have the map of Tomioka. I wonder if you can see it. On the top right-hand side, you can see the area in red, enclosed in red. And this is still a difficult to return zone. So you would see a flexible container bag scattered on fields. People still cannot enter this area in Tomioka, even today. So we have 2,770 people living in Tomioka. We used to have 16,000, and about half of them are working. They have come to this city, to this town, and about 1,000 people had to evacuate and came back. And in addition to that, we have a migration promotion, and we have people migrating into this area. And so the residents, their backgrounds are different. And against this backdrop, we have to think about how we can develop our towns. And that is the current situation of Tomioka. So when we think about recovery of Fukushima, this is not only about Fukushima residents. We need to think about these issues with all people around the world. So that is what I say to everybody when I give these talks. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is joining online. Harue Sanpei, are you ready? Yes, I am. Can I start? So Tsushima district of Namie town is where I lived, and which is indicated in blue. And you can see the star in yellow. That is where my house was. From Fukushima Daiichi, the distance is about 30 kilometers. After the nuclear accident, it's been 15 years. The Tsushima district of Namie Namie town, where we live, had a population of about 450 households and 1,400 people at the time of the accident. So after the nuclear power accident, government did not inform us properly about what happened at Fukushima Daiichi. Other municipalities, such as Futaba Town, Okuba Town, prepared buses for residents to evacuate and evacuated to Saitama, Aizu, and other areas. However, there was no evacuation order from the government or TEPCO in Namie town. Namie town, well, Tsushima district is about 30 kilometers away from Fukushima Daiichi. So there was actually instruction to evacuate to Tsushima district. The evacuation order was issued to everyone, and everyone evacuated to Tsushima district from the coastal area, and it took 3 to 4 hours, where it used to normally take 30 to 40 minutes by car. And this picture was taken by the National Route 114. These evacuees were accommodated by elementary schools, junior high schools, senior high schools. However, some houses also needed to accommodate evacuees because all the facilities were full. There was no privacy during the evacuation life, and the evacuees spent 4 days in the Tsushima area from March 12 to 15. In order to accept evacuees, which were about 8,000 evacuees, the residents of Tsushima had to light fires to warm everyone and to cook and to fight against the cold. Those who evacuated to Tsushima district from coastal area, they had no time to pack what was necessary. They had no medication as well. So there was a local clinic in Tsushima district. So those people evacuated without their medication lined up to receive medicine. And the line was so long, like a queue was so long, like a 200, 300 meters. And the glass patch, the dosimetry was worn by the people within the clinic. And it showed that over the 4 days from 12th through to 15th, the exposure was 0.8 millisievert. That's indoor measurement, meaning that those who queued outside was actually exposed to higher dose. So residents and also those evacuated were exposed, and they were very concerned about their health afterwards. Tsushima district is shown in pale brown, and in the middle you could see the red zone that accounts for 1.6% of Tsushima district, which is designated as specified reconstruction and revitalization base, where there was a focused decontamination work. But other than this red zone, other areas are under evacuation zones. And if you look on the right-hand side picture, you can see red blocks, and those are the blocks which went under demolition until 2023. And after 2023, more houses were demolished. There were 450 households before the accident or earthquake, but 60% of the houses were demolished now. The specified reconstruction and revitalization base is under the less than 20 millisievert per year exposure, meaning that evacuation orders lifted. And my house is located within this area, so I'm supposed to repatriate. However, lots of people are yet to return and feels that they have forgotten their hometown, because I think it's partly because of their psychological damage they suffered. At the time of the accident, my grandchildren were 3 years and 5 years old, respectively, and they are now 20 years old or more. And they grew up outside Tsushima. And even if evacuation order is lifted, you can't really demand them to go back to Tsushima. There's no infrastructure in Tsushima district, no gas station, no post office, no shops. You can't ask residents to return there. Over the past 15 years, our houses were ransacked by animals. They entered inside the houses. Every time we return to our house, we find there are animal droppings and foul odors, and some residents gave up their hope of returning as a result of that. The farmlands are covered by trees, and they now look like a forest. You can't really remember what was like before the disaster. It is no longer the hometown we remember. It's no longer can be called as a beautiful countryside. So nuclear disaster destroyed the natural environment. Residents of Tsushima district lost their farmland where they had put a lot of work into. So senior residents are crying and saying that wish they could return to Tsushima district. These are the pictures taken at my house. It looks very shattered. There were 10 of us living, over 4 generations of us living in Tsushima district. We benefited from the blessings of the nature. We ate wild vegetables. We lived with the nature. We ate mushrooms, but nature is gone. 2017, 1.6% of the landmass of Tsushima district was designated as a specified area where evacuation order is lifted, and we are now have to decide what to do with my house. But last year we decided to demolish our house, and in January it was actually demolished, because keeping them mean that we would be imposing this to our children to take care of, which would be actually quite negative legacy, and we don't want to leave that to our children. But if you go back to our house, you could see our family memories. In every room, there are a lot of memories. You could see a pillar, one of the pillars. When my first grandchild was born, I started marking the height of my grandchild along with the height of a grandchild's parents. I'm thinking that at some point in the future, the grandchildren's height would surpass her parents' height. However, the elder grandchild, the elder one, had to leave the house when she was 5 years old. So there was no more measurements marked on the pillar. And on the January 17th and on 20th of January 2025, our house was demolished. It was a house packed with memories. So we kind of gave farewell, to bid a farewell to our house. We kind of hold a private ceremony. So family members gather to give a funeral. 8 years ago, my father-in-law, who actually built this house, passed away, who had said many times he wanted to go home. So we took his picture with him to bid farewell. And we stood there listening and watching our house being demolished. And this noise of the heavy machinery, and it torn us apart. Nearly 200 people lost their lives in Tsushima district as a result of the disaster. And their remains are still with the temples outside Tsushima district. Their bones are yet to be returned to the cemetery of their ancestors, including my father, because I don't want my father's remains to go back to the place where no one lives. And I don't think my father wants that. Therefore, I'm still thinking whether or not to build a new tomb, to find a new cemetery. And on the right-hand side, you could see the site where our house used to stand. So this is about the tradition, carrying on living a tradition. So we want to actually preserve the tradition and traditional arts as well. Thank you very much. Sanpei-san, you can have a little bit more to wrap up your presentation. Nuclear disaster is something that needs to be handled responsibly by the government, and I hope the government will have more time to hold dialogues with us. And we are raising our voices now towards that goal, and hope you can support us in our endeavor. Thank you very much.
We would like to go to Abe-san next. Can you hear me? So I'm Shotaro Abe. So I'm living in Okuma, growing kiwi. And so I'd like to talk about my daily activities and why we grow kiwi. So I grew up not in Fukushima, but in Kanagawa Prefecture in Yokohama. And I went to university in Tokyo. And in 2020, I was engaged in university circle activities and student activities. And then I had association with Okuma. And then in 2020, I fully relocated to Okuma, growing kiwis and also working for an IT company. And originally, I was living in Yokohama. So when there was a disaster, I was in Yokohama. And we didn't have any disaster in Yokohama. But then I now live in Okuma and growing kiwi. And from that perspective, I'd like to share with you some of my observations. So the relationship between me, Okuma, and Fukushima happened within 5 years. So I became a student in 2020, and I wanted to become a journalist. And after I joined university, I did interviews in Okuma. And as mentioned, Kimura Norio-san, we interviewed him about the disaster. And we made this into a book. We also made a documentary. So that was something I was engaged in. And as I was engaging in these interviews, I felt that I could associate with this region in a different way. And in third year of university, I decided to start growing kiwi in Fukushima. And we began growing kiwi. And of course, you cannot suddenly start to have large yields, but then gradually, from about last year, we have been able to harvest kiwi. So my family is not a farmers, and I didn't go to an agricultural faculty. So why did I start growing kiwi? So actually in Okuma, kiwi was a major local produce in this town. So as I was doing interview, this is a memoir that one of the interviewee had written. So he had supervised about kiwi cultivation, and he had a goal of having sales from kiwi of 100 million yen, so that kiwi could become a major local produce in Okuma. But because of the disaster, he had to evacuate and he couldn't reach his goal. And before the disaster, Okuma was cultivating kiwi, and his goal was 100 million yen. So this was their goal. And if you investigate the sales immediately before the disaster, they sell about 90 million yen. So they was very close to reaching their goal of 100 million yen. And however, they had to evacuate without reaching their goal. And I found out through my interview, and I felt that this kind of disaster really have a major impact on people's lives. And in Okuma, it was known as the romantic fragrant village with fruits. And you can see on the left-hand side photograph, you have this signage in Okuma's town, and this bear is holding kiwi fruits. And on the right-hand side, you have a pear, was also famous for Okuma, and also salmon was also their major produce. And this was a pride of the Okuma. And disaster, and of course there was an evacuation order. They couldn't continue farming, and of course the radiation spread really had to be. The trees had to be cut down, and they had to be derooted, and the soil had to be removed for decontamination. And because of that, this kind of scenery that existed had disappeared. And after the disaster in 2020, after joining the university, when I came here for interview, we didn't see this kind of scenery. All the trees had been felled, the fields were empty. And I saw this kind of situation. And then people, before the disaster, they had accumulated their activities and they had their own history. And I felt that if I started cultivating kiwi, I could regain Okuma's history and culture. And that is why I began cultivating kiwi. And in this photograph, there is one of the co-member. So the person in the middle was he's 2 years older than me, still young. So he's actually the writer of the memoir that I introduced you. He's the grandson of the person who wrote the memoir. And he was in Okuma from his childhood. And after the disaster, he couldn't continue with farming, so he evacuated to Chiba Prefecture, and their family began growing kiwi in Chiba. And we learned how to grow kiwi from him, and then we gradually began to grow kiwi. And what we are doing now, when we started 2 years ago, our field was all flat, and there was nothing, very flat. And this field, before the disaster, they used to grow pears. So they had pear trees for agriculture, but because of decontamination, all the trees had to be felled, and we loaned the land so that we can grow kiwi. And we plant seedlings, and then gradually we had the cooperation of the community as we cultivate kiwi. And last fall, autumn, we shared kiwis with the peoples of town. So there were 350, more than 350 people eat kiwis all together at once, which made Guinness World Record. And we want to be able to use kiwi. So, for example, during the festivals, and so that we can restore kiwi within different events and culture. And also in recent times, we had a new school built, and we had more children attend the schools. And we built this kind of trolley for children so that people can play on my farm. So we're doing this kind of activities as well. And so I gave presentation about our activities, and we want to be able to inform people about our kiwis. We want, and also to increase the number of the size of harvest, and also to create linkages with the local people. And that is my kiwi activities. But lastly, yesterday was the March 11th, the day of the disaster. And in 2011, March 11th, I was in Yokohama, so I didn't experience any damage. But after 15 years, at this timing, I have the opportunity to think about this region, and I'd like to share some of my views. So I do have some concerns about Fukushima and Okuma. There is a strong sense of unease. So in the center, we have a renovation happening, and it feels like there are more. But it's all based on the government's money, and they are focused on building a infrastructure. And that is, so the same system that existed for the nuclear power plant has been perpetuated. So we haven't learned anything from the disaster. And what we're trying to do anew is something I don't understand. So in Okuma City town, we have the government, the municipality, they have the budget, and that has a major impact. And against that background, we don't have local individuals be able to perpetuate their culture and history. And it is becoming more and more difficult to see such individual activities in this kind of last 10 years. And in this kind of situation, even though we have new buildings and maybe there are some jobs, we really need to be able to continue with the culture and history of the town. Unless otherwise that will be all gone in the next several years. And that is something that I would like to resist, and I want to do something about it. So, and that is why I'm growing kiwi. But then through these kind of activities, and in addition to that, we want to be able to preserve the culture and history of the people that had existed before the disaster. And based on that kind of thinking, so in the Hamadori region of Fukushima is known as the disaster-stricken area, and the main topic is obviously restoration. But it is not only about having people come back, but we need to go beyond that. There's been a major disaster, and how can we create a better community is something that we should be tackling. So for us, we have American anthropologist Margaret Mead said that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful community citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So this is something that we want to be able to do in recreating our community. And although the population has not come back, maybe this is a good timing to think about what kind of community we want to build. And so, and to really be able to create a better community. So maybe I went beyond my time, but that is all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we would like to start a Q&A session. We would like to take as many questions as possible, although we are running behind our schedule.
安藤さんに一番初めに来ている質問。
So I would like to start with question for Ryoko. Please go to Q&A. Click on the Q&A. So question for Ryoko. You say that experts, industry, government, and academics did not have the ability to speak in plain Japanese to ordinary people following the incident. Is this still the case, or is it there a continuing gap in language or terminology understanding? If there has been improvement, how has this been achieved? Has any improvement helped the community build trust in industry, government, or experts? Thank you for the question. We saw some partial improvements. However, I wouldn't say there has been a significant improvement. 15 years have passed. Immediately after the accident, there was a lot of awareness of changing the situation. So there's a lot of efforts to change the situation, which continued for several years, but people forget. And people forget that they wanted to change the situation. So I think the situation is returning to the original state. Of course, some people still remember the importance of making improvements, especially the government side. I think the government officials forgot about this problem. That's very regrettable. So that's the answer to the first question. Next question also is for Ryoko. So another question for Ryoko. What support does a government or industry provide to NPO so you can develop capacity and capability? Support from the government, there's almost none. After we have become a non-profit organization, no support has been extended. Partially because we didn't seek to receive support from the government, and also the menu of the government support is not very suitable for us. In case of Japan, industry and the government do not just give us money. They would always say, you have to follow our requirements. And their requirements do not always meet our needs. If we are to receive funds, we have to follow the intent of the government. That is why we don't really receive hardly any support, and nor from the industry. There was a question about the video clip. I think this answer will be quite long. Maybe we can go to the next question. Allow us to skip that question about the measurement. So what is the cause of bacteria in the soil? Is it related to the tsunami flooding? Or is the bacteria related to radiation killing some species and promoting the growth of other bacteria? With regard to the bacteria in the soil, the bacteria in question is actually spreading across Japan. So we have specified the bacteria causing the damage. It is not really related to radiation. The bacteria is generated as a result of continuing to grow the same crop over many years.
はい、ありがとうございます。では今度木村さんへの質問。What is the government というところなんですけれども、なぜ政府は建物の修復に資金を投入しなかったのか、なぜ解体と新築のみに資金を投入するのだろうかということです。
ちょっとこれ難しいっすね。なんか日本の文化なのかもしれません。要するにスクラップビルド。古い建物って日本あんまり大事にしないんですよね。まあ場所によっても違うと思うんですけども、なんか解体して新しいものを作った方が、これ正確ではないです。私が思うのは、経済が回る。そういうことなのかな、なんていうふうに、個人的には理解をしています。はい。
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Next, so I'd like to have a question on the video. Maybe Jack can answer this, or maybe Ryoko can answer this. So about who did the whole body measurement of 124 people who supported this funding. And after that, and it says the above question is about the statement about the government forgetting about the people. So in Suetsugi region, the measurement was done voluntarily, and that is because it is going to be complex, but in Suetsugi region, the evacuation order was lifted quite soon, within 20 to 30 kilometers, and there was no support from the government. And not only from the government, but also from Iwaki city. So they had to engage in the activities on a voluntary basis. So about the whole body count of 124 people, they had to bear the cost for themselves. And for the bus transportation, we did claim that amount to TEPCO. And it was a very burdensome process. And for the second question, the government may have forgotten is a question, and that is the reason. So there's a gap in system support. So that is the reason we could not receive any funding from the government or the municipality. Thank you very much. Next, can we go on? So the last question about TEPCO lied. So as mentioned in the video, TEPCO lied. However, it's reasonable to assume that providing accurate information to the general public based solely on limited information at the time of the disaster was difficult. I believe that restoring the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant requires cooperation from many organizations and people, including TEPCO. Does the ICRP intend to deal with TEPCO as if it were a company of liars? So maybe this is not a question I should be answering, but I think I don't know how the ICRP feels about this, but this is the impression that the resident had, their candid impression. So for those of people who have not experienced it, it's going to be difficult to understand. But at that time, it was very confusing. It was very, we didn't know it was intentional. But for many of the residents felt this way, it was quite clear. And so we will not be discussing who's responsible, but that was the situation basically. So we have had all the questions answered. Thank you very much. So with that, we are nearing the end. We'd like to go into the summary. And today, we did have testimonies from different people, and I think it's going to be difficult for you to digest everything. But the video will be made available from the ICRP website, as well as from our Fukushima Dialogue website so that you can view it later on. So if you want to view this again, then please do look at those video. And it is a very complex situation, but we did hear stories about hope. And there were talk about people willing to work towards those goals, and that is a hope for people of Fukushima. And I think this is some positive outcome coming, the only outcome, positive outcome coming out of Fukushima. And at the Fukushima Dialogue, we will continue to have a dialogue every year. And usually we have it once at the end of the year. So we plan to have one in November or December. And we will provide it online with simultaneous interpretation. So I hope you participate. And we do have different radiation measurement activities known as the open radiation system that has been developed in France. We'll be using these kind of devices for measurements of radiation. We also are open to members, even from overseas. If you're interested, please become members of Fukushima Dialogue. Please visit our website and become members. We'll be very happy to welcome you, and we'll be able to tell you about the latest information from Fukushima. And lastly, I would like to ask Mr. Terry Schneider for his closing remarks.
Okay, thank you, Yoko, and good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to all of you. Just briefly, before to close this webinar, just first of all, I've seen that some questions have not been responded, but we will do it after the webinar. Don't worry about that. So just briefly, if I can have the next slide. With this webinar, I would like to highlight a few points on the contribution of the ICRP and NPO dialogue meeting with regard to ICRP activity. First of all, the publication 146, and nowadays the ongoing activity, and just to highlight a forthcoming event from ICRP in the following weeks. Next slide, please. So with regard to publication 146, I encourage you to go to the website. You can download it free of charge, and there are some also French translation. The contribution from all this dialogue was a significant understanding of what is going on for updating the recommendation of ICRP in the event of large-scale accident, with a specific focus on managing intermediate and long-term phases. You have seen that today. This is still going on. And then the feedback from Fukushima and the testimony of the people was very helpful to better understand all this mechanism. The second point, and you also have seen some element today, is the key role of human dimension. We cannot manage radioactive, the radiological protection of large-scale nuclear accident just with calculation or radiological protection consideration. We really need to embark all the human dimension, and it has been largely highlighted today. Next slide, please. So then, this has been done, and the publication has been issued in 2020, but we still have some ongoing activity in the process of the current process of reviewing and revising the system of radiological protection. Some of the ongoing work still interact with some lessons from Fukushima, and notably with regard to the human dimension. The first element is we currently considering to revise the tolerability of risk and looking for what we mean by reasonableness, how low is low enough, all these elements to be proportionate to the specific situation. All these elements clearly take some lessons from Fukushima. The second point is the application of justification principle. What does it mean, especially in case of emergency and existing exposure situation? And Fukushima also provide key element with regard to that, notably the role of society to judge the justification. The next point is also all the question for ICRP on exposure situation. What does it mean to move from planned exposure situation to emergency and then to existing exposure situation, which mean the early phase of the accident and then the recovery process as we discussed today. The next point is we currently addressing some question on sustainable development. And then we have seen that sustainability of protective action, the long-term perspective is a key element, but then how to do it is not so simple. Then, of course, with the publication on ethics, nowadays we clearly discuss how to apply ethical value, and for sure the post-accident situation highlight a long series of ethical value which need to be better addressed. And then finally, we also currently discussing the environmental radiological protection, and then of course the contamination of large territories is a key issue for addressing environmental radiological protection. So next slide, please. So just before to conclude, I would like to highlight a next event that will occur the 27th of April. Currently, there is no direct information on the ICRP website, but we will have a web workshop on the lessons for radiological protection from Chernobyl and Fukushima Daiichi NPP accident, with the overview of the scientific and practical learning and summary of learning and impact on the system of radiological protection, and that will be an online event. So before to close this webinar, I would like, of course, to first thank all the panelists, and they have made a tremendous testimony of the past, current, and the future of the situation, and thanks a lot. This is really impressive, and this is important to have this your feedback on all this situation. Of course, we need to dedicate this webinar to all the people who suffer from the accident, and that was a good way for ICRP and the NPO Fukushima Dialogue to have this webinar and to give the floor to the resident directly. And then, of course, I would like to thank the NPO Fukushima, Ryoko, and all the participants, and to thank the ICRP Secretariat, Kelsey and Charlotte, especially to organize this webinar where we had around 350 participants. If you still have some questions, do not hesitate to send some questions, and then we will interact with you. You can contact directly ICRP or contact the NPO Fukushima for further discussion. With that, I would like to thank all of you. Many thanks, and have a good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending where you are. Thank you so much.